Hello everybody and welcome to Xperienceships and Coffee Breaks with. My name is Cecilia and today I'm meeting Greg, who's the CEO and founder of African Impact. So African Impact has been voted the best gap year and volunteer provider 4 years in a row. How amazing is that? So I'm so excited to meet Greg. A little bit about his story. So when he was young, he went to Africa to do some volunteer work, but being there, he just fell in love with the continent and has been working in different kinds of African travel ever since. So we'll mostly speak about Greg's role as a leader and a founder, but we'll also speak about how it is to actually live and be in Africa, and then some ethics about volunteerism. So I'm so excited to meet Greg. I hope you guys are too. So let's bring him in. So let's just start and welcome Greg to this Xperienceships Coffee Breaks chat. It's awesome to have you here. If you don't mind, we can start by just introducing yourself and your job and what do you do?
Hi, yes, so my name is Greg Bowes. I'm one of the founders and directors of African Impact, as well as a few other tourism companies, Africa in You, African Horse Safaris, and Penda Photo Tours.
Wow, so African, could you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. African Impact, African Impact's really, I mainly work in the area around kind of tourism and kind of development, and so kind of where the two combine, and where we can make great tourist experiences for people that actually do good is kind of where my passion kind of really, I guess, lies. African Impact is a volunteer and intern travel company, so we host volunteers from all over the world come to the projects that we run. We have projects in Kenya, in Tanzania, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Ghana, Botswana, that we basically facilitate volunteering. So that gives people the opportunity to really experience kind of the projects they're working on, whether that's medical, teaching, conservation projects, could be lion research, could be elephant research, could be great white shark monitoring, could be, as I say, working in all sorts of different arenas, and they get to kind of volunteer their time, get to see a country, and be a bit more than a tourist. They're not there for a few days. They can really kind of get a really kind of authentic experience about the destinations they go to. A lot of people do it as part of a gap year, although more commonly these days it's kind of career breaks, career changes, post-university, sometimes just an alternative way to travel, really.
That's awesome. That's really cool. What brought you to Africa, of all places?
Yeah, I came to Africa. I first went to Africa on a holiday, actually, it was a family holiday that we went when I was about 16, and just completely fell in love with the safari part of it. That was kind of it was an amazing experience. And so when I came to finish my A-levels, and I decided to take a gap year. And I backpacked from Ethiopia down to through Nairobi, through East Africa, all the way down to Cape Town in South Africa over a few months, and which was an amazing experience. And at the end of it, I managed to kind of get a voluntary job working. I was really quite lucky to do this, really. I was working in a game reserve in South Africa, and they just released 4 lions into this game reserve, and they needed someone to monitor them to make sure that they just researched like what they were eating, kind of, but also it was part of the community requirement was really to make sure that they don't escape the game reserve, and so to make sure we knew where they were. And so I spent about 3 months, kind of at the end of my travel, 4 months, more like actually. Basically was given a GPS tracking device called telemetry, and just drove around this game reserve looking after these lions, or making sure they were okay. Which when you're 18 is like the most amazing experience in the world, you know. And so I did that, and whilst doing that, I was sent volunteers to help me out to do it, and there was some really great parts around like the volunteers coming. I mean, first of all, they help you out. It's company, it was kind of makes kind of living there in the middle of nowhere a bit easier. But also saw some of like the, I guess, negative sides of like volunteering. Was really, the reality was they weren't volunteering, they were watching me work. And so it kind of got me thinking that maybe like volunteering could be super powerful if done correctly, and can be really beneficial for, I mean, the volunteers at the time were funding the program that was allowing me to work there. So it had great benefits on the ground, but also you could see for volunteers, if done rightly, they actually can take so much away from it, as a real kind of, I guess, a real tool for growing up and kind of, I guess, establishing their own thoughts, opinions, kind of mindsets, and clarifying a few things maybe. And so after I finished that kind of, it was like a 4-month kind of contract. And when I finished that, I had about, I think I had like 6 weeks before I was supposed to start university, and I'd been through a game reserve in Zimbabwe, which I met the owner of, and we got on quite well. And he was doing some lion work, so I phoned him up and said, "Hey, I'm a self-proclaimed lion expert now. Can you hire me for a few weeks, and I'll help you out for a few weeks?" And he said, "Well, come up and have a look." And then I got there, and that project actually was perfect for volunteers. It kind of, there was loads of things volunteers could do, and so the guy who owned the reserve, his daughter and myself started this volunteer project there. I deferred university another year to see how this went, and that was kind of the start of African Impact. And we got some volunteers arriving. It was really kind of quite quickly quite successful, and we were asked by other kind of people in the areas and other game reserves and communities, is, "Hey, can we have some volunteers? Can we do this?" So we were like, "Yeah, sure." So we just started trying to set volunteer projects up in places, and we made loads of mistakes. We didn't really know. We weren't volunteer experts. We weren't community development kind of experts at all at the time. And so, but as it kind of grew over, I mean, the next year went pretty fast, to be honest. And so I decided, actually, no, this is a pretty cool thing. Forget university for now. I can come back to university. Let's carry on. And we started to bring more and more skilled people into working with us on how to do volunteering properly, and kind of we learned loads, and kind of really got the communities involved in what we do, and really tried to create this balance between genuine like impact that is like responsible and making a genuine difference, and not just like a feel-good thing, and giving amazing experiences that for travelers that kind of go beyond the normal travel experience, and really kind of help I guess at the age a lot of volunteers are, really help shape kind of their thinking towards life. And so that was my kind of like, that was how it started. And since it's grown from there, really kind of we've looked at other kind of responsible ways to bring travel to Africa, which has been the start of some other businesses as well.
Wow, what a journey.
Yeah.
How long has African Impact been live now? How
So we started it in 2004, 5-ish. So it's kind of like 15, 16 years old now.
Cool. Just from my own personal interest, like how has the volunteering industry like developed over the years? Like, do you see a difference from 2005 till 2020?
Yeah, massively. I mean, it's a relatively young industry. Like the idea of people using volunteering as a form of travel, and doing that with an organization which has some great benefits to it, is a relatively young concept. And so when we started it, it was massively unregulated. It was a bit like, there was a lot of unknowns to it, and it was an emerging thing. We really, I mean, to be honest, we didn't sit in this game reserve in Zimbabwe and come up with like a genius plan of what to do. We just happened to we were the right time in the right place, kind of with the right ideas, and there's definitely elements of luck in that. So to begin with, it was growing fast. A lot of people entered it with different in different ways or different mindsets. So you had NGOs entering the volunteer space to try and to help them with their work. You have tourism companies thinking that maybe volunteer travel is a great way we can further our kind of their responsible kind of work, or a great kind of business as well. And so kind of it was a bit of a first maybe kind of, I think from like the late 90s until like maybe 2005, 6, 7, when we kind of emerged as well, there was quite a rush of different companies joining. It was all over the place, the expectations, it wasn't established. Whereas over the past few years, it's really kind of refined into a form of an alternative form of travel. It's not and there's now a lot more kind of codes of practice. There's been there where there's kind of issues around kind of the impact that volunteers make being potentially negative. I think they've been highlighted a lot more. There's also a commercial side to it in terms of it's become more competitive, and which is not necessarily a bad thing. So yeah, it's really grown. It's a lot. I think to start volunteering now would be a bit harder than when we started it back in 2004. And it's maturing kind of all the time. And I think on the whole getting better. I mean, the standards are getting higher and higher every kind of year, I think.
That's really good, and it's good to hear.
Mm.
I myself, I did the whole volunteerism thing when I was younger.
Oh, cool.
8 years ago, I went to Costa Rica, but I worked with children and taught English. But I then did not think about the negative sides of traveling abroad, and like, I'm gonna go and help people. I didn't think of the carbon footprint that I was doing with the flights, and and like they might as well hire somebody local than me coming there, but
it's a super interesting. I mean, there's definitely a naivety to, I think, most people coming out, and including myself, and like when we started doing this, is inherently volunteering sounds good, right? You should just be able to volunteer and do good, and that should be fairly easy. And why is there anything negative? And I think what I try and do is really try and, you've got to compare things. I guess first of all, apples for apples in terms of scenarios. And so a lot of people often say to you, I mean, I also say to me, like, kind of, hire local people to do the work, or kind of actually a donation would be much more valuable than the volunteering, and so, but the reality is that, and that can be totally true, like it really can, in the right context, but context in detail is everything. And so I mean, the starting point of these things is, like with volunteering, for example, is that the choice between, say, a donation and travel isn't actually the choice. When you were 18, you weren't considering, do I write a big check to Costa Rica or do I travel? The chances are you were more considering, do I backpack in Thailand, or do I do a ski season in Canada, or do I volunteer travel? And so it isn't like it's one or the other there. It's actually, it's if you can then, so the really reality there is, can you turn that well, it is fundamentally a good drive that you have in terms of, I want to kind of, maybe, if you might say naive, but a good drive, in terms of a well-meaning drive. I want to do something good. Can you turn that into something positive? And that's really what we try and do. So it's saying, and one of the first things to do is be really honest about it, is say, this is volunteering, and volunteer travel is limited. That's the first thing you have to accept. It's not the solution for development across the board, but it can also do things, and this is where I think it's really vital with volunteering. It can do things that sometimes, like, money can't do, and it can have an effect. And I maybe, like, two really good examples of that are, one of the first projects we set up actually was, we were in Zimbabwe to begin with, then we went to Livingstone in Zambia, and we started working at these community schools, and these community schools are schools which were for kids that didn't get into the government schools because there just wasn't enough places. So they didn't have the funding of the government schools. They didn't, which was limited in any way. They didn't have the resources, the teachers, the infrastructure. So these were really like the lowest levels of schooling you could do in Livingston. And Livingston is where Victoria Falls is. It's a super big tourist area. And so great for volunteers to go there. It became a really popular project. Our volunteers went into the schools, and we first of all, we like, again, have certain like do no harm principles. So our volunteers, they're not teachers, so they support the teachers that are there. They don't replace teachers, for example. And so but what we did was we've worked there now pretty much like for 14, 15 years. And one thing we noticed over the time, over years of kind of working with within these community schools, was we managed to get the grades higher. So if kids would fall behind, sometimes it's in schools that are massively under kind of resourced like that, what you find is that even if you've got a basic kind of level of English and you could just read a book one-on-one, you can get that kid kind of a little bit caught up and kind of help there. So we managed to get grades higher. We didn't get them to the level of the government schools, but we definitely improved their grades. But one thing we noticed, which was really kind of, I guess, really profound for us and kind of shows like the power of what volunteering can do if harnessed in the right way, was we noticed that the kids from the community schools were getting a lot of the jobs in the tourism companies. And we were like, why is this? Like, why are the kids that kind of we've kind of been involved in, or our volunteers have been involved in, why are they getting these jobs, and where there's kids in other government schools, it proportionally just wasn't the same. Like it was massively disproportionate. And so we started asking, and I asked a few of the lodge owners, and like and one of them was said to me, like, oh no, if the kids come from, it was the school called Nakatindi, if they come from Nakatindi school or come from this school, it says we know that they're often going to be great to work with us. And I was like, why? And he said, and he said, oh, really understand kind of tourism and I guess the mindset of tourists. And it was, and all that was, we boiled that down, and what that really was that most people living in like rural Africa don't actually spend a huge amount of, obviously won't really be interacting with kind of Westerners at all, to be honest. And if they are, it's not in a very, often it's in more of a, like a hierarchical kind of like setting where they're working for someone, or they're a tourist serving kind of someone, and it's not on like a peer-to-peer basis, which is not great. And so by volunteers kind of just being there and kind of being able to form like and like a cultural learning between the two, the volunteer and the student happening, that really enabled them to be kind of perfect for the biggest employment industry that is in their town. And so volunteering there, and you couldn't buy that. Like you can't buy that with regards to development of money. And so volunteering, it has its limitations, but if you want to be a really responsible volunteer company, actually investing in the areas where you know it can make a difference is really, I think, really kind of the most sensible and kind of highest impact way to go about it. And then the other thing as well is obviously the difference you make on the volunteer. And one of the big things we always say as well is if we can change that perspective that a lot of volunteers have, in terms of, I think I can go there and have good intention, and instead of knocking that down and kind of being like, this this is like a white savior complex, or it's kind of, this is wrong, actually just embrace that and channel it in the right way, where it's to help them see kind of the full scope of development, and how these challenges really can be quite tough, and how they fit in. I think you make more responsible people at the end of it, and the end of that process, and you can then, and I think if over a lifetime of that volunteer, maybe they'll donate in a different way or take a different approach to these things. And actually, I think that's a really positive thing. So yeah, there's definitely some sides of volunteering that can be negative and can have negative consequences. But I think if you're really honest about it and channel it in the right way, it can be super profound and super positive, and a real a real win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like the positive sides of it are like big as well. Like obviously, like all travel makes a negative impact on the world, but at the same time, you can make a massive impact for somebody else or a whole community even. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that one of the biggest ones, I guess one of the big things is the carbon footprint side of it is something that, I mean, it's not exclusively to volunteer travel, it's just travel in general, isn't it? And so I think that's a dilemma that I don't think the travel industry has found a good kind of we haven't solved that problem yet, but I think that we've, and something we need to address, but it's something that we've got to be very mindful of, and so I think that's probably right, really probably the most pressing thing that as an industry we need to be looking at right now.
Yeah, I understand that, and there are there are worse things you can travel for than travel to volunteer, so feel too bad about it anyways. But moving on, like more towards your job role in Africa, it impacts, like today you're the founder, co-founder, but then like what do you do more on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so basically really kind of overseeing the direction of the company and making sure we deliver on what we promise, but also which is quite extensive. And one of the things with volunteering is we have many clients in some ways, and so we have a responsibility to obviously to volunteers who are paying for this experience. We need to make sure that they get a great experience, and we have to balance at the same time along that. We have essentially, I think, the communities and the conservation projects that we work with are also kind of in some ways that they're our partners, not our clients, but our partners, and we need to make sure that we're delivering them the best possible service we can deliver to, and so keeping those two things balanced is a lot of what I do. And the way you do that is to have amazing people around you who work with us, and so ultimately most of my job is about managing people and helping helping problem solve with people, helping kind of, I guess, show the vision and kind of where we want to go and how we want to make a difference, and then and then working with them to try and achieve it. And we're super lucky because we're a business that is built around something positive, like doing good. I think we attract, like, generally, I think we get the most amazing people come to work for us, and so with people that, to be honest, are often miles overqualified for the role. They're not coming for the money. It's not a hugely lucrative kind of industry. It's really for the passion of what we do and the experience of working with us. So I think it's really important for us as in my role with Afro Impact as part of the leadership team is to make sure that we empower those incredible people as much as we can to deliver those kind of commitments that we've made to our clients and our partners, really.
That's amazing. I love to hear the word empower and leadership in the same sentence.
Yeah, and there's a big difference, I think, between like managing and leading in these situations. And I think, like, there's a place for both, and I think for me with a company like African Impact, which is fairly emotive, like we we're not selling paper clips. No offense to anyone selling paper clips, but like we're selling something that's quite emotional, and it is a big step for people, and like a big value proposition. And so we really need to make sure that we are leading, and as much as managing at all times. And we also people, a lot of our team, and we have a team in total probably over well, kind of pre-coronavirus, over 120 and 30 people around about that working for us, and they're often in remote places, and so we have to we have no choice. They have to be empowered to run things, but they also have to have really great communication in terms of like, this is where we want to go, this is how we want to do things. And so really most of our work my work is around around helping people, and working with people, but also a little bit around trying to predict kind of the future of where volunteering comes next. And it's quite exciting because it is a fairly young industry and massively evolving all the time. So we constantly want to be creating the next kind of project which is super appealing to volunteers to come on, but also super impactful in what it delivers. So pushing those boundaries all the time, and how can we do that, is really important.
Yeah, wow, yeah, amazing. I was actually gonna lean into that, like, what does the future look like for you guys? Because obviously you have been affected now.
Yeah.
I can imagine, with the travel.
Yeah, I mean,
everything.
tourism
to adapt quite a bit.
Yeah, tourism really has taken a bit of obviously taken a battering. It's probably like going to be the I'd imagine one of the worst affected industries, and probably will be one of the longest to recover. So there's not a lot of positives to say about coronavirus from a tourism perspective, really. I need to be straight about, I guess, be really straight with that one. I think what the future holds is going to be interesting. I think we're definitely seeing, I think that there's a short term and there's a long term future. Short term, we're seeing definitely a bit of a drive for people. How can people help virtually? So whether that's through like virtual internships,
yeah, I was gonna ask.
yeah, and we're trying to, I mean, to be honest, there's some things that just aren't possible, which we kind of, but there are things like, so for example, we work with a lot of like a few micro enterprise projects, where we could get virtual interns to help with marketing things. We have a foundation, the African Impact Foundation, which we are trying to keep as active as possible during this time as we can absolutely afford, and that can keep projects going, and virtual volunteers can really help us there with fundraising efforts and those kind of things. And so we're trying to keep and we're also working with partners on who want interns, and trying to, can we do that virtually? Can they have those virtual interns? And if they can, how? And so we're kind of busy doing that at the minute. And I think short term, that's going to be like it's going to be a change and kind of a way of working for us. I think long term, I think there's definitely going to be a place for virtual internships, and I really like them because depending on what area you're covering, but in many ways they're very accessible. Anyone can, like, it doesn't require if the cost threshold isn't there. It's probably more accessible, and a great way to kind of try something. So I think there definitely will be a place for them long term. I think, although long term for us, I think it's really about what the two things that I think we really look at is what are going to be the development needs, like, that we need to address post coronavirus on the ground. And so both from a conservation and a community point of view, are the needs that volunteers the needs that volunteers can bring the skill sets volunteers bring, are they going to help? Can they help with different needs, should I say, and what are those needs? And I don't know if we fully know that yet, and so we got to keep assessing that. And then also, like, how does this affect like volunteers travel? And I mean, travel in general is one thing, but kind of are less people going to be traveling kind of long term? I don't know if that is necessarily true. I think what people do with their time, I wouldn't be surprised if you see kind of slightly more static travel, in terms of people fly to one place and stay in one place, and rather than kind of like going everywhere. I think what will be affected more is things like mass tourism places, which we don't really deal with. So I think that like your big crowded cities that are suffer from over tourism, I think there'll definitely be, they'll have bigger changes probably than kind of us working in rural Africa. And I think one thing we also have to be really mindful of is our responsibility in terms of, Africa hasn't got a prolific kind of infection rate right now. I mean, Africa, it depends where you are, but most places we work in, on the whole, its infection rates are fairly low. It wouldn't be responsible, I don't think, if like to try and get as many volunteers on the next flight out as possible necessarily to go, where there might be infections. And so we've got to really manage that. I think as and see how that shapes. So I also think that maybe volunteers kind of needs may change a little bit. They might want to do things which are, a lot of potential volunteers right now are in like the last part of education, which obviously has been massively affected. Exams have changed, have been cancelled, and all of those things, and schools. So maybe there might be a bigger desire to do a form of travel which isn't just about giving, but about kind of like improving themselves. And so I think maybe our volunteering might need to incorporate a bit more of a learning element to it going forwards.
Oh, that's a really cool insight.
Hmm.
To incorporate learning element into it too.
Yeah,
That sounds.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's, I mean, it's very America on the whole, Americans, when they volunteer within like a university framework, incorporate that anyway. But I don't think in Europe it's as popular, and so or hasn't been. But I think it could definitely be. And there's so much you can do, whether that's about the area that you're volunteering in, so whether it's like healthcare, medical, or whatever, or if it's just kind of there's general skills, that kind of even down to things like being a bit more, I guess, being a bit more mindful of the skills that you learn when volunteering, from teamwork to kind of people skills to organizational skills, those kind of things. And how can we work with volunteers to demonstrate that they've improved in that? Or, I mean, so I think it's going to be it'll be interesting to have a look at. We're also speaking to quite a few like personal development coaches, and kind of how can we incorporate like a coaching service through volunteering, because we push people out of their comfort zones when they volunteer. They do things that they wouldn't have done before, and how can there's an organic kind of processing of that for a volunteer in terms of, and growth in that. But how can you be more mindful about that? How can we make volunteers really embrace that and use that and channel that in a way that is really kind of going to benefit them in further life? I think those things may become a lot more a bit more kind of interesting for people to look at over the next couple of years.
Yeah, cool. And also like the reflection process and making the process more tangible for the ones going through.
Yeah.
They can go back and go, oh, but I did this and I learned that there. And that can also, I reckon, help when looking for a job, for an internship, or stuff like that, to have that reflection mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think demonstrating that you've been through a process, I mean, something that I think we really look for when employing people as well, is that we work long distances, and as an employer, like people that demonstrate the ability to kind of reflect and kind of recognize where weaknesses and how they can improve them, and see that that's a real strength. It's it's a character trait that we all try to do and really try to nurture within African Impact, is that constant reflection of how we're doing as a company, as individuals, as departments, and and where we can improve. And so I definitely think incorporate, if anyone who wants to volunteer or wants to travel, to be honest, over the next couple of years, kind of any form of, whether it's educational travel or international kind of educational travel, so internships, volunteering, even backpacking, is how can you demonstrate and kind of and look and show people that yeah, you can reflect and work on those reflections, but also celebrate the good bits. Like you said, people do amazing things and often forget them. And one of the things we do with African Impact a lot, halfway through people's stay, and so generally like every 2 weeks, we have a mid-stay feedback celebrations and kind of really just reinforcing like what people have actually done and showcasing how much they have achieved, you know.
Yeah, because while you're in it, you easily forget.
Yeah, and
Because
the
it
normal.
becomes the norm, and
Exactly. Yeah. And even if it's like negotiating, I don't know, negotiating food in a market, like that's something that you will never have bartered so hard in your kind of European village market compared to say in Zanzibar or somewhere. So kind of learning those skills is fantastic. And kind of having the confidence to do that. And I think the confidence gaining is a huge thing. I think it's super great to kind of look back on those things. Like you say, you don't realize you're even doing it at the time.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Um, we've covered so many different bits here, so I like, what have we talked about? What haven't we talked about? But uh, uh, I was thinking we wrap it up, or start to, like, wrap it up from here. It's like awesome what you guys are doing, and it's so interesting to hear about how you are adapting to the current situation, and how the future of voluntourism and all these bits and pieces. And you've talked about how you are as a leader, and yeah, I think it's been great. I don't know if you have prepared this, but I think I asked for you to share like 3 resources.
Yes. Yeah.
You look so happy now.
No. I luckily I'm laughing because I went through the questions about half an hour ago, and I'm glad I did now, because I had to think about that one for a while.
So if you have any resources to share for within your industry, that would be cool.
Yeah, sure. So I think the three right resources that I find really helpful for me is I try to pick some different types of resources, so hopefully it's useful. Is one, so we spoke a lot about African Impact, which is a kind of quite it's not a small company, it's not a huge company, it's not a small company, but also been involved in quite a few startups which are much smaller, kind of like one person running an operation. And so one of the resources that doing that has really helped me kind of get things going, especially if you're starting something or if you're trying to get into a new area, is using kind of online work, kind of what's it called? Online project work. So like for I use Freelancer a lot, and for me, you can get other people to help you. Obviously, you have to pay them, but kind of it's generally fairly affordable, and you can get some really good quality work. And I think for people entering into maybe starting their own tourism business, which there's a lot of people doing that kind of thing. I think if you can't always be specialized in every aspect of having to run a tour company, and so harnessing things like Freelancer, I think .com is one I use, but like I think 99 Balloons, I think, is another one, or something like that. They have proved like invaluable, I think, and a lot of it's been like data kind of capturing or kind of help building databases or that kind of thing. I found them really, really useful. So I definitely don't, and often it's a lot easier to do that than kind of employ someone else, or and so that'd be one resource that I definitely recommend for any kind of tourism startup entrepreneurs on a bit of bootstrapping, I guess, which I think is going to be the case going forwards for a lot of people, or the current climate, you know. The other one is I chose a book which I always really liked, which I actually brought, which was a book by the founder of G Adventures, which is like an adventure travel company based out of Canada. And his book is called Looptail. And it was, for me, it was really cool. Is we've done a little bit of work with G Adventures now and again, but not too much. But the fact that essentially it was a travel company that really put purpose at the heart of kind of where it wanted to go. It's a great book for anyone interested in how to create cultures in companies, and how to take it beyond the theory and into the practical. And so I would recommend any HR person, to be honest, like as well, if you're in HR, like it's a great book. If you're anything to do with responsible travel, I think it's a great read, and a really good, a really good insight into what kind of like successful companies done, and a great mindset into doing it. And then my third resource, which I don't know if it's a resource, it's more of a, maybe it's a bit of a pet hate that I have, which I think is around productivity, and that is your computer. Is like the amount of times we work and obviously in fairly remote places, and so you can't just nip down and buy a new computer so easily when things go wrong. But if you think about how much time you spend on a computer, and how much kind of like I walk sometimes, like whether it's going to visit a project or in the office, and we're starting computers up and they're super slow and they're not kind of, it takes half an hour for them to get going, whatever, like it's kind of just, is so unproductive. And so I think kind of looking after your computer and kind of making sure that you have got that kind of a good computer, a good equipment that kind of gets you productive, is absolutely underrated. And actually a computer is probably if you think about it on a per hour basis, it's probably the cheapest thing that you use, you know, because you're on it so much, even though it is an expensive item. So I think and I think people who work with me will laugh at me saying that, but that for me is like it drives me nuts when we're kind of all waiting for kind of computers to start, or kind of someone's taking ages to load up an Excel sheet and it's not loaded up because this is not working, the computer's old. So where you can get the best you can in terms of equipment, because actually it's not expensive, it's the cheapest thing you can get, really.
That's really cool. That's a really good advice and a good way of seeing it. Like, take care of your computer.
Yeah. It's simple, but yeah, I think it stands you in good stead.
Yeah. No, I recently started doing it myself, cleaning it and, like taking care of it and petting it. It's just like, because it's amazing for how long you can actually use them.
Yeah, and yeah, totally, absolutely. So yeah, treat them well.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for this chat, Greg. It's been amazing to have you on. And cool. I'm positive we will see you soon again, probably. Maybe for another chat, maybe something more, I don't know, niche area, if we find something more specific to focus on. But this has been awesome to hear all about volunteerism and all the different sides of it, and a little bit about what you do.
Perfect. Yeah, really nice talking to you. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'll see you around.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all for joining me and Greg for this coffee break. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as we have. If you're looking to connect with Greg and learn more about volunteering, taking a gap year, or traveling in Africa, then you have all his links in the description below. And yeah, that's it for this time, I think. Take care of one another, and I'll see you guys in the next video to keep exploring more careers.